Your soulmate saying, "I want to talk to you right now. It's very urgent, open this now. My beloved child, don't look away just yet, because there is a message moving toward you at this very moment, and if your heart has ever searched for an answer that never arrived, this could be the beginning of everything changing." Strange, isn't it? Out of all the moments in your day, you found yourself here, listening, wondering, hoping that maybe this title was meant for you. What if that feeling wasn't random? What if somewhere beyond ordinary timing, a conversation has already begun, and your soul recognized it before your mind did? Imagine receiving a message that doesn't arrive through a phone, a letter, or a familiar voice, but through an unexplainable feeling that keeps returning no matter how many times you try to ignore it. That is exactly why this moment feels different. Someone connected to your future has reached a point where silence no longer feels possible. They don't want another day to pass carrying words they were afraid to say. Deep inside, they keep repeating the same thought. I want to talk to you right now. It's urgent. Yet this urgency is not driven by panic. It comes from clarity. From realizing that delaying the truth only makes the distance feel heavier. Have you noticed how certain thoughts appear without warning? A familiar face crosses your imagination. A memory that shouldn't matter suddenly feels alive again. You tell yourself it's only coincidence, yet somehow the feeling returns stronger than before. Stay with this story for another moment, because those quiet signals often arrive before life's biggest turning points. Long before two paths finally meet, something invisible begins preparing both travelers. One learns patience. The other learns courage. And somewhere between those lessons, destiny quietly opens another door. The one who wishes to speak with you has been carrying unanswered questions for longer than you realize. Not because they lacked feelings, but because they feared the timing. Sometimes people wait until life becomes quiet enough to hear what their own heart has been whispering all along. Every distraction fades. Every excuse loses its strength. Then one undeniable realization remains. If I don't speak now, I may lose something I was never supposed to lose. That realization changes everything. Pause for a second and ask yourself, why do certain people enter your thoughts on completely ordinary days? Why does your intuition become louder when the world around you becomes quieter? What if those moments are invitations instead of accidents? What if the heart understands connections long before logic is willing to admit them? The greatest conversations often begin before a single word is spoken. They begin with awareness. With expectation. With an invisible pull that refuses to disappear. There is another reason this message feels urgent. The future rarely announces itself with loud celebrations. More often, it begins with a quiet decision that seems small at first but transforms everything afterward. One conversation. One honest sentence. One unexpected moment of vulnerability. Entire chapters of life have changed because someone finally chose truth over hesitation. Perhaps that is the crossroad standing before this unseen person now. They have reached the point where pretending no longer feels easier than speaking honestly. But here's the surprising part, they are not searching for perfection. They are searching for understanding. They believe there is something only you would truly understand, even if you've never met in the way you imagine. Strange? Maybe. Yet every meaningful connection carries an element that cannot be fully explained. It simply feels familiar, as though two stories have been quietly moving toward each other for much longer than either one realized. Think carefully about this question. What if the urgency isn't about time running out, but about opportunity finally arriving? Those are two completely different things. One creates fear. The other creates possibility. And possibility has a remarkable habit of appearing exactly when people believe nothing important is happening. The voice calling toward you isn't asking for impossible answers today. It is asking for openness. For patience. For the willingness to notice what others overlook. Because while the world rushes toward noise, extraordinary moments usually arrive wrapped in silence. They don't force attention. They gently invite it. Only those who remain aware recognize them when they appear. Something else is unfolding behind the scenes. While you continue living your ordinary routine, another life is quietly shifting direction. Small decisions are being made. Old doubts are fading. Confidence is replacing uncertainty. The distance between uncertainty and action is becoming smaller with every passing day. And when that distance finally disappears, words that have remained locked away will no longer stay hidden. Before this chapter moves forward, hold on to one thought. Not every urgent message is about danger. Some are about hope arriving sooner than expected. Some are about two journeys finally preparing to intersect after seasons of silent growth. And sometimes, the greatest surprise isn't discovering that someone wants to speak with you, it's discovering how long they have been trying to find the courage to begin. So don't rush ahead just yet. The next piece of this story reveals why their heart suddenly refuses to stay silent. And once you hear what changed behind the curtain, today's mysterious message will begin making far more sense than it does right now. A quiet shift has already begun, and this is where the story takes a turn that very few people ever expect. You may think the urgency comes from a sudden emotion, but the truth reaches much deeper than that. Something happened that forced this person to stop running from what they truly feel. It wasn't one dramatic moment. It was a series of small realizations that slowly formed one undeniable conclusion. They kept trying to convince themselves to wait a little longer, another week, another month, another perfect opportunity. But every delay only made one question grow louder inside them. What if the person I've been thinking about is waiting for the same conversation? Sometimes life doesn't change because of extraordinary events. Sometimes it changes because ordinary moments suddenly begin carrying extraordinary meaning. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that someone keeps appearing in your thoughts without invitation. No matter how busy the day becomes, no matter how many distractions arrive, one presence quietly remains in the background. At first, they ignored it. Then they questioned it. Eventually, they accepted that some connections refuse to disappear because they are asking to be understood rather than forgotten. Now listen carefully, because this is where everything begins to connect. This person has stopped searching for reasons to stay silent. Instead, they have started searching for the right words. That sounds simple, doesn't it? Yet finding the right words can be one of the hardest journeys anyone takes. How do you explain a feeling that grew slowly? How do you describe a connection that never followed ordinary rules? How do you tell someone that their presence changed your perspective before they even knew it? Those questions have echoed inside them countless times. What if you've also experienced those quiet moments? A feeling that something meaningful was approaching without any clear evidence. A sense that the next chapter of your life might begin with a single unexpected conversation. Those thoughts often arrive before visible change. They are not promises of certainty, they are reminders to remain open when life offers a new possibility. There is another detail hidden beneath the surface. This person isn't reaching out because they expect immediate answers. They simply don't want another opportunity to pass unspoken. They have learned that silence protects comfort, but honesty creates movement. And movement is exactly what their heart has been waiting for. Here's something remarkable. Every meaningful relationship, whether friendship, partnership, or a life-changing encounter, reaches a moment where fear and courage stand face to face. One says, "Stay where it's safe." The other whispers, "Take one step forward." Today, it feels as though courage is finally winning that conversation. Perhaps that's why you felt drawn here. Not because someone can predict your future, but because stories like this remind us that meaningful connections often begin with one brave decision. Someone choosing authenticity over hesitation. Someone deciding that truth matters more than uncertainty. And maybe, just maybe, you're being reminded of something your own heart already knows, that openness creates possibilities which fear can never discover. If this story has made you pause and reflect, share your thoughts in the comments. Sometimes hearing another person's perspective reveals something we hadn't noticed ourselves. And if these journeys of hope, purpose, and meaningful connection speak to you, subscribing simply means we'll continue exploring them together. Now let your imagination travel one step further. Picture this unseen person standing at the edge of a conversation they've replayed hundreds of times in their mind. They imagine different beginnings, different endings, different reactions. Yet every version arrives at the same destination. They no longer want important words to remain hidden. That is why the message feels urgent. Not because tomorrow disappears, but because today finally feels ready. Still, one question remains unanswered. What was the single realization that erased nearly all of their hesitation? What truth became impossible for them to ignore? The answer to that question changes the direction of this entire story. And once it is revealed, you'll understand why they feel that speaking with you can no longer wait. Everything has been leading to this moment, yet the most important part was never the message itself. It was the transformation that happened before the message was ever imagined. Think about that for a second. Words can be written in a few moments, but the courage to speak them is often built over countless silent days. That is exactly where this story reaches its deepest point. For a long time, this person believed that waiting would somehow make everything easier. They thought the perfect timing would appear on its own. They imagined a future where every doubt disappeared before they ever needed to take a step forward. But life rarely works that way. Instead, it quietly teaches us that certainty is often discovered after we choose courage, not before it. One evening, as everything around them seemed completely ordinary, an unexpected thought settled into their mind. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was calm, almost peaceful. The thought simply whispered, "Some opportunities don't ask for perfection. They ask for honesty." Those words refused to leave. Through every conversation, every routine, every distraction, they continued returning until there was no longer any reason to ignore them. Have you ever noticed how certain ideas seem to follow you wherever you go? You move on with your day, yet something keeps gently tapping at your attention. It isn't trying to pressure you. It isn't demanding immediate action. It's simply reminding you that an unfinished chapter still exists. Sometimes, that quiet reminder becomes the beginning of an entirely new direction. Now imagine standing at the edge of a bridge you've never crossed before. Behind you is everything familiar. Ahead of you is everything unknown. Most people hesitate because they cannot see what waits on the other side. But every meaningful journey requires someone to take the first step before the full picture becomes visible. That is exactly where this unseen person finds themselves now. The urgency they feel isn't about rushing life. It's about refusing to let fear continue making decisions on their behalf. They have finally understood that unanswered questions create far heavier burdens than honest conversations ever could. And once that realization settled into their heart, something remarkable happened. The uncertainty that had once held them back began to lose its power. Stay with this thought, because it may be more meaningful than it first appears. There are moments when two lives seem to move independently, unaware that each experience is quietly preparing them for the same destination. While one person learns patience, the other learns trust. While one discovers resilience, the other discovers vulnerability. Neither realizes that every lesson is shaping them for a meeting that feels surprisingly familiar when it finally arrives. What if that's why certain seasons of your life felt slower than expected? What if every delay carried a lesson that could only be understood later? Sometimes we mistake preparation for waiting, when in reality, preparation is the hidden work that allows future opportunities to be recognized instead of overlooked. The person who wishes to speak with you has reached that understanding. They no longer see the past as wasted time. Instead, they see it as the path that brought them to this very decision. Every unanswered question. Every uncertain moment. Every quiet hope. Together, they formed the courage they once believed they lacked. And here's the beautiful part. The conversation they imagine isn't filled with complicated explanations or impossible expectations. It's surprisingly simple. Honest words. Genuine listening. Two people allowing truth to exist without pretending to have every answer. Sometimes that is all a meaningful beginning has ever required. Take another moment to reflect. If someone came to you with complete sincerity, without masks, without games, without hidden motives, would you recognize the difference? The world often rewards loud voices, yet the strongest connections are usually built through quiet authenticity. They don't need to impress. They simply need to be real. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson hidden inside today's story. Not that every unexpected feeling predicts the future, but that openness creates room for possibilities that fear would never allow us to see. Life has an incredible way of surprising those who remain willing to listen before they rush to conclusions. As this chapter comes to a close, remember one final thought. The words, "I want to talk to you right now," were never meant to create pressure. They were meant to remind you that meaningful conversations often begin with a single moment of courage. Somewhere, someone may be preparing to speak their truth. Somewhere, another chapter may already be unfolding in ways neither person fully understands. And in the next part, the message itself will finally begin to unfold. Not as a perfect ending, but as the first page of a story that could only begin after both hearts were ready to hear what had remained unspoken for so long. Before we go any further, there is one final piece that changes the meaning of everything you've heard so far. The message was never delayed because the feelings were weak. It was delayed because some words carry so much meaning that they cannot be spoken until the heart is completely certain. And now, that certainty has finally arrived. Picture this moment as if time itself has slowed down. The noise of the outside world fades into the distance. Every distraction disappears. Every unfinished thought becomes silent. Only one question remains in this person's heart. If I had the chance to speak right now, what would I say first? Surprisingly, it isn't a grand speech. It isn't a perfect confession. It isn't an attempt to impress. Instead, it begins with something incredibly simple. I've been wanting to talk to you for a long time. Those words may seem ordinary, yet behind them lives an entire journey of growth, reflection, and courage. Every day of hesitation has led to this single beginning. Every unanswered question has become a reason to value honesty more than fear. Now imagine receiving those words when you least expect them. Would you immediately understand their meaning? Or would you realize only later that this conversation marked the beginning of a completely different chapter? Life often works that way. The moments we remember forever rarely announce themselves as life-changing while they're happening. Only after looking back do we realize that one conversation quietly redirected everything that came after. Here's what this unseen person hopes you'll understand. They don't expect perfection from you. They don't expect every answer today. They don't expect certainty about tomorrow. They simply hope that if the opportunity ever arrives, both of you will choose honesty over assumptions, curiosity over fear, and understanding over silence. Because every meaningful connection grows stronger when two people are willing to listen before they judge. Stay with this final reflection. How many beautiful opportunities have disappeared, not because they weren't real, but because nobody felt brave enough to begin the conversation. Perhaps that's why this story found you today. Not to predict your future. Not to promise impossible outcomes. But to remind you that genuine connections are built one sincere moment at a time. Every meaningful relationship begins with someone deciding that truth is worth speaking, even when the outcome is still unknown. If this journey has given you something to think about, I'd love to hear your perspective in the comments. Your thoughts may encourage someone else who happens to be listening today. And if stories like these inspire you to reflect, grow, and see life's possibilities from a new perspective, you're always welcome to subscribe and continue this journey with us. Now take one slow breath and carry this thought with you after the video ends. Somewhere, someone may be gathering the courage to say what has remained unspoken. Somewhere, another heart may finally be choosing openness instead of hesitation. And somewhere within your own journey, the next meaningful conversation may arrive when you least expect it, but at exactly the right time. Until then, keep your heart open, your mind calm, and your hope alive. Because the most extraordinary chapters don't always begin with loud announcements. Sometimes they begin with one quiet message. I want to talk to you right now. And from that single sentence, an entirely new story can begin. The story doesn't truly end with a message, because every meaningful conversation leaves behind a choice. And this final chapter is about that choice. Not the choice of fate, not the choice of coincidence, but the quiet decision each heart makes when it finally stops hiding behind uncertainty. Imagine that the long-awaited conversation has finally begun. There are no perfect surroundings. No dramatic soundtrack. No extraordinary signs in the sky. Just two people, each carrying experiences that shaped them into who they have become. For a brief moment, silence fills the space between them. Yet this silence feels completely different from the silence that existed before. It no longer carries fear. Instead, it carries possibility. The person who wished to speak takes one slow breath and smiles. Not because every answer has appeared, but because the hardest step has already been taken. The beginning.